Okay, hi. Thanks for having me. My name's Ingrid Bird. I've grown up around this area and work here now in the library. I'm an artist with a day job, but the art I do is collage, and I've been working in different mediums of art since about, well, I guess ever since I was a teenager. But it really started when I left working for, I used to work in biological research, and decided that what I saw under the microscope I could model with fiber. I was a fiber artist for quite a time and moved to St. John's to do that. And along the way ended up starting to work in collage, and what started me with that was actually 9/11. And I'm quite inspired by sort of what's going on at current events. Things, and at the time I had started working at a university library that had the magazines and periodicals, it's called. And that first week I began there was the week of 9/11 that happened, and after that we were inundated with all the imagery from that event in all the magazines and newspapers, and I would have to sort through all this stuff and put it away and process it, and I really just wanted to make happier pictures out of all of this. So with all the discards that I get through my work, I ended up making collages that were of happier scenes than and using the actual scenes that I was cutting out of magazine and coming up with something more peaceful. So that's been kind of a driving force with it all. But it's my method with collage is very improvisational. I don't know what I'm going to get. I'm inspired by color. I certainly have a palette of sorted out chips of magazine color. I go through a magazine and pull out all the color and sort it out on plexiglass sheets, and then use that as my palette. Then the color and the texture of what's in my chips usually ends up inspiring some kind of picture. It's kind of like an ink blot. My creative process is, I find it really is help if I'm using what's essentially stuff that's going to be thrown out. And when you have a certain amount of it, and it was, I had access to all the discarded magazines. So we started mining the color from that. Well, one thing I started doing was in terms of looking for different colors. I know different magazines are going to have, Vanity Fair will have a ton of texture for me of fabric. I'm starting to play a lot more with that now. Fashion magazines are great for that, for different colors. If I want to have more natural landscape, then travel magazines are going to be full of kind of nice scenery that you can use. And decoration magazines are really good. Architectural Digest is quite nice for having. Architectural Digest is probably one of my favorite ones right now to go through and pull apart. So I tend to work in small pieces, and I like to hold it in my hand and compose as I go. So the ceramic tiles are the medium that works as a backing because it's waterproof. For the glues, I use dilute glue and dip my paper in it and then place it on the ceramic. Well, actually, it's been a long process of trying to figure out the best way to do this. So I like experimenting. I was kind of my first formative career was working in research, biological research. So as a lab tech and as a technologist, I had a lot of hands-on making things. That was another source of detritus that was always really interesting too. But anyway, I digress. But in terms of being an artist, I find using the materials you end up having around you, to me, is the strongest game for, as I say, if it's discarded, then I don't have to worry. I'm not using expensive materials to and that I'm going to ruin. So I don't worry about a failure. There's no failure. It's just, okay, this one needs work, and move on from that. If you embrace failure, then you can actually end up making a lot of success out of it, and you don't have to call it a failure. So that's my philosophy with it. So I don't tend to work with any pre-existing notion I'm going to do this or that. If I could, sometimes it's the materials, the texture, the color that inspires me. Like, oh, I really want to make something with this. For instance, I could show you this one, which is called Dame Corona, and that is what I imagined the ancestral portrait of coronavirus in, because looking at all these dour kind of old ancestral portraits that I've seen, it kind of made me think of that. And so I was here. I was just using advertisements actually from for jewelry, and putting them together in a whole nother way that you wouldn't expect. So I like changing the nature of the material to be something completely different. So that to me is success. It's a failure, I guess, if it's just too expected. It's often because it's a process of improvisation. For me, the practice was learning how to know when I want to stop. And there was an aha moment when, oh, it looks like this. I can recognize it as, sometimes I recognize it just as something that I imagined listening to fairy tales. Like this particular exhibit I have in the library right now has a lot of kind of fairy tale elements that I can see in there. Because I loved that when I was reading as a child. So it's an exploration of creativity, actually, I guess is what I do in my art. And so to that end, I've developed these methods that, so I'm improvising, but how do I know when to stop? So that was what I had to work on for the last, it's been about 25 years I've worked on this. The process of self-discovery that goes on in this is ending up to be instrumental in where I go with something. The big job is all the sorting out of all the scraps. That takes me quite a while too, and can happen for quite some time before anything is produced. I have about 25 plexiglass sheets, and I just keep them in a pile. And when I'm working on, I'll sort of go through a magazine, doctorate all the interesting scraps, and then sort them out into the color groups I have. And I'll notice that things like, I used to work with New York Times pretty much exclusively at first, because that seemed to be the best paper stock and had the larger pictures that I was available to me at the time. And since I started working here in Knowlton at the library, I also have access to other magazines. Like Powder Match is interesting because the contrast is that New York Times it's a lot of concrete and sky and grays, and I can hardly ever get reds, but Powder Match has a ton of red and pink, and so it's kind of interesting noticing the different things that I'll find just in terms of mining color from the images that we have. That New York Times, they're showing a lot of urban imagery, so that's a lot of concrete and sky, a bit of sky, but blues I will have in plenty. So what has COVID done for my work? It has shown up in the subject matter of my work because it's all around us, and current events really do end up giving me images to play with or that I can aim at. So to that end, I was playing around with, I liked all these cuttings I had of, they were just jewelry ads, and I realized, I can make this kind of ancestral portrait. So that was done about COVID. And The idea of a lineage about COVID was natural to me from having worked in a lab where we would analyze how the genetics of a given organism. So that was a natural. Then the other thing is how people are coping with it themselves. So imagining to that end, with the idea of all these children staying at home so this one was about homeschooling, that suddenly all these parents were having to deal with their kid can't go out, and now they got to school them. And so what was that seem like? It was on my mind. They're all kind of my favorites. Once I make them, they're all like little children. Oh, I can't have one favorite. Well, it's the title piece for this show, The 1001 Nights. So it was where I imagined that poor woman had to try and tell stories all night long to keep herself alive. And so it was a place I figured had to be good inspiration for telling stories. So that's one of my favorites, I think. Things I do to get myself ready to work is I have to tidy up a bit before I can start. And then when I sit down to a clean table, then I make a big mess. But it has to be clean to begin with, and that's part of the process. And the other thing is I need a wood stove going because the process I do with my collage is I'm soaking the paper in dilute glue and then laying it on a ceramic tile and then waiting for it to dry, because I have to do that because the paper is transparent, showing color on the other side. Until I've got that sorted out, then I move on. So I tend to collage only in the winter time, because that's when the wood stove's on. How long does it take me is something I find kind of a confounding question to answer, because it varies a lot. It's an experimental process. So with that, I can achieve something sometimes. If I'm really lucky, I achieve it quickly, but most times it's a lot of trial and error, and then I get somewhere. Like sometimes I've collaged something the board has been covered 3 times before I'm finished. I can't really quantify the time it takes on the art because there's many steps to it. And so I work on a few pieces at a time, and then in the mounting, I mount the tile on a board. And by the time I get to that, it's I'd say it's about, in a year I'll get 24 pieces done. But you can't sort of give one small a sort of unit time per piece, but to me it seems immaterial how long I've taken the piece is the piece, and it's the size that it is. And so I tend to structure my pricing by really the size, which astounds a lot of people. One time I worked in a gallery, and as a gallery sort of the assistant there, and people would often tell me, I don't know how to price my work. They say, well, price it by the square inch. And I go, what? And I say, seriously, take your piece and figure out take a bunch of representative pieces and figure out per square inch what you'd like to charge, and then sort of work out the average. That's my lab in me, the science. I just approach it quantitatively. I've gotten down to using these smaller tiles because I like this 5 by 8 inch or 6 by 8, is it? So it's a nice size. It works with the size of chips that I work with. So I've done really large pieces, but I found them so tedious that I got fed up with them at the end of it. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's not the time for me to really do a lot of artwork. It comes at a more peaceful place for myself. If I'm overwhelmed, taking time out and reading a book is, for me, a good go-to thing to do. Go for a walk with my dog. Work in a style that pleases you, because you're going to be doing that a lot. So make sure you like your process. And after that, it'll all be gravy because you'll be enjoying what you do, love what you do, and don't worry about, well, I do find it useful to have a day job because it forces me to organize my time. If I had, I did work as an artist full-time for a couple of years, but I found it was very anxiety-producing because I had to think about making my art make money, whereas now I don't bother with that, and I find I'm a lot more creative and successful in coming up with stuff I like, and hopefully others like it too. And since it's not about the money anymore for me because I have a day job, and I can really throw myself into it. And I think trying to not be worldly about it, don't think too much about the value of your art, just do it, and that will carry you forward. In terms of inspiring, taking inspiration from artists, there's some local artists I'd really like to salute. Isabelle Deval, who's been encouraging artists to perform in groups, and just last night walking the dog down that park, the trail along the river, where Isabelle Deval has encouraged so many artists to take part in this, and it's decorated up for Halloween. And it's fantastic. There's these papier-mâché with sculptures, and it's just a marvel to go and look at. So that's what I say, that she's got people participating from who probably didn't participate in art before, plus a lot of professionals, and it's just fantastic what she's doing. So I would say look to that if you can inspire others as well, that's really quite something. So anyway, hats off to her, to Isabelle Deval. In terms of getting hold of me, I work here at the library in Knowlton, at Pettis Memorial Library, and you will find my art on the walls at times. This is my third exhibit I've had here. Had one in 2010, another. So I do pop-up kind of shows, and that's a little benefit I get on my job, is that I could be here to tell you about the art when you can come and see it. I just want to say thanks to the library too for being such a gracious host of my exhibits over the last few years, and encouraging me in all that I do there. And we have big plans in the library, so we will hopefully have an expansion and more room for artists to come and talk and give workshops, and that's what I'm looking forward to in the future here.
I would like to acknowledge the support of the Official Language Minority Community Media Consortium and the Government of Canada for the Community Media Strategic Support Plan.